This is Landry.Audio, and it's 3 a.m. down here in Australia at the moment. I've been waiting for months to do this interview. When I was growing up in Calgary, Alberta, the centerpiece of my bedroom where I lived in Silver Springs in northwest Calgary was a Theoren Fleury poster that hung from my wall while he was in mid-stride in the classic Red Flames uniform. We're talking a time in Calgary when Bret Hitman Hart was arguably the biggest wrestler on the planet, and Doug Flutie had joined the Stampeders years before he would go on to make an impact with the NFL. Since that time, Theo has gone through a hell of a journey, including a playing career that's also taken him to the Colorado Avalanche, New York Rangers, Chicago Blackhawks, and internationally to Finland and Northern Ireland. He's written 2 books, including the best-selling Playing with Fire, discussing his sexual abuse as a young hockey player and how that led down a path of gambling and addiction. Nowadays, he uses these experiences to reach out to assist others through his Fleury 14 organization, and he joins us from Calgary, Alberta. How is the morning treating you over there?
Good. Yep, I actually did a podcast earlier today, so this is a rarity that we're not on the road this week till Wednesday, so it gives me an opportunity to catch up on, the hundreds of requests we get to do podcasts. So happy to be with you.
Awesome. Well, as I said, I think we're going to cover a lot of the same territory that you've done before, but hopefully, it's for a new audience. I think, I'm sure as the experience, you get the opportunity to meet a lot of people, and I'm sure elements of the story are new to them as you explained it on the road. Look, the first thing I wanted to ask you about is, we might as well talk hockey, which is most people will know you about historically. What did you feel about the Flames bombing out in the first round of the playoffs? I thought it was a bit of a shame because on paper, I was sort of expecting the potential for another Calgary-Tampa replay.
Well, I think it was predictable, they're a high octane offensive team, but what I've noticed is the trend of them playing bigger teams and not having a whole lot of success against those teams. And Colorado has 3 big defensemen and a bunch of forwards who play very aggressive hockey, and so I said it was predictable. So,
and is Calgary your default team that you end up supporting? Or are there other teams that you generally like to sort of follow these days?
I think I'm just a fan of the game in general. Obviously, I live in Calgary because I played here and whatnot, but I do follow the Flames and get asked all the time the same question that you asked me, but I think they're a team that's definitely on the rise. Their play in the regular season was outstanding, and but the playoffs is a whole different animal in itself, and the intensity amps up, and the physical play amps up, and when your 2 best players aren't necessarily guys that thrive in those conditions, I think the end result was, like I said, predictable.
This year we saw 3 Canadian teams make the playoffs, and all of them got knocked out in the first round. Do you tend to automatically default and support Canadian teams, or there's a few people like myself that would still rather see guys like the Islanders get up over Toronto?
I think as long as the games are competitive, which, I think the whole entire, especially the second round, has been really entertaining. And, it's amazing to see what Carolina has done in the first 2 rounds, upset the Stanley Cup champions, and then, handled a great New York Islanders team who have great coaching staff, quite easily. So, and, when they brought the salary cap in, this is what they wanted. They wanted parity, and they wanted every team to be competitive and have an opportunity to win a Stanley Cup. And, that's what we're seeing this year.
Do you have any issues with that? Almost the way you say it is sort of like, oh, it was a bit of an unnecessary compromise. Do you think salary cap is a good or a necessity for the game?
Yeah, I think it, it's created sort of a pyramid system in your payroll, but, I think at the end of the day, the game is growing financially and fan support. And, when you have parity in the league, I think that's really important. And, I find that teams now, if they're at the bottom of the barrel, so to speak, that it doesn't take them a long time to build a team which can compete on a nightly basis, in the NHL.
Okay. Want to talk, a little bit more about your career. Well, when we go through, when you read the background, you're a bit of an anomaly to make the NHL because of your size. At the time when you were going through juniors and going into the draft, did it ever was it in the back of your mind that you might have been too small to play in the NHL, like a lot of the detractors were saying about you?
Well, I think I was the only guy that believed that, that I could play in the NHL. And so, I never listened to the noise, I was a guy that worked extremely hard in practice and, on the mental side of my game. And, I figured out early on that, I had to develop a certain style of play in order to, to have success and found that sort of magic formula and turned it into, a pretty decent, 15-year career.
Yeah, definitely. One of the things that I'm hearing a lot of retired players who are from your era of the game discuss is that they lament a lot of the modern game because I've heard it from a few players that they talk about how the game as it stands today has stripped the players of their creativity, and I also miss a lot more of the aggression and the fights that happen in the game. What's sort of your opinion of where it is at the moment?
Well, now the coaches are making as much or more than the players. They want to make sure that they have long-term employment. And so, I believe philosophy is, every coach coaches for a 0-0 tie and you get a scoring chance in the last minute of the hockey game. That's sort of how it's, being played. And, we have video, we have analytics, we have all this stuff. And so basically, the coaches are just playing Xbox with these guys, and there is a lack of creativity. I think every team pretty much plays the same style. And, I think when they put in the instigator rule back when I was playing, that they took the policing and they put it in the hands of the league, and so, that's why we're seeing the game being, a little bit more chippy, a little bit more cheap. We're seeing a lot more guys, getting injured and, but, the athletes are definitely, faster, they're fitter, and so what we're seeing is just an evolution of, man, is that, we know a lot more about nutrition. We know a lot more about exercise and, even the bodies of the NHL players are completely different than the bodies that we had. So, it's a lot more core-based training, whereas, we had big arms, big legs, and big asses, right? And so, the way that we trained, is completely different to the way that these guys train nowadays. So.
Okay. Look, I'm mentioning Calgary because, as I mentioned, that's where I come from. That's where you spent most of your career, and I guess for people not listening to this, you're a very well-regarded person of the city, and you sort of retain a mythological status. at the time in the mid '90s when you ultimately ended up getting traded, you had expressed your belief that you were mistreated by the Flames organization, and you clarified your comments to say that it wasn't about the fans, it was about the organization. But can you just sort of take us through what was going on around that period of time when you were at your height in the league?
Well, what happened was, as I was halfway through my final year of my contract with the Flames, we had started negotiating an extension to that contract, and I had a meeting with one of the owners. Probably, I don't even know what it was, a month before the trade deadline, and they offered me a 4-year deal at $16 million, and I countered and told them I would stay for $5 million for 5 years. And what they told me was, we can't afford that. And so I said, okay, I'm going to go see what I can do in free agency, because I only get one opportunity to do this in my career. And basically after that meeting, there was a headline in the paper a couple days after that basically said that I had turned down 5 years at $25 million, which is what I had counter offered. And, a couple days after the article came out, I got traded to Colorado.
You only ended up spending one season playing there. What did you sort of think about the time that you had there? I think you ended up hurting your knee, I think, in one of the very first games, didn't you?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I was basically there for 5 months, so I was like a rent-a-player, right? And so, went to an amazing, talented hockey team. It was like playing on an all-star team.
At the time,
Joe
yeah, of course, yeah.
And Peter Forsberg, Patrick Waugh, Claude Lemieux, Milan Hayduk. Yeah, like it was ridiculous how good we were. And, we had a great run in the playoffs, and, we lost to the eventual Stanley Cup winners, the Dallas Stars, in Game 7. So, it was an amazing experience, and it was fun to be around guys that their focus is Stanley Cup or nothing, and it's good to be around a group of guys like that think that way, act that way, and govern themselves accordingly.
How do you compare, like, out of those 4 teams that you played for? What was the best team? Not in terms of the success, but when you look at the management, the structure of the organization, player support.
Geez. I think each organization brings something different, and it's a privilege and an honor to play in the NHL, and your job is to win the Stanley Cup every year, and when you don't do that, it should be considered a failure. And so every organization that I played for, especially when I got to Calgary, we won a Stanley Cup in our first year, and after that, it was sort of a transitioning of they dismantled the team and moved in a different direction. When I went to Colorado, they were already there. They were ready to win. When I went to New York, the team had struggled, and they spent a lot of money to bring in a bunch of free agent talent, and unfortunately, we just didn't gel as a team and have the success that we probably should have. And and then when I went to Chicago, they were a team on the rise, and we ran into some injuries early on in the season, and didn't have the year that we were all hoping for.
I've had the opportunity to go to New York a few times. I think it absolutely is arguably the greatest city in the world. In other interviews, you've talked about your issues adapting to it because you were from a small town in Saskatchewan. What were sort of the issues there? Because, I mean, you can certainly get yourself into a lot of fun while you're there.
Yeah, for sure. And, I would say my state of mental health at that time in my career was not in a good place, and they tried to help with medication and use big pharma, which in the end was probably not a good thing. And at the end of the day, it was it wasn't my addiction that took me out of the game. It was my state of mental health that I could no longer manage my depression and my anxiety and my panic disorder, and so I had a year left on my contract in Chicago, and I knew if I went back there that it was going to be much of the same struggle, and so I decided to leave the game and try to figure out my mental health issues.
So how does that's something that I guess that probably isn't discussed a lot or understood, that the city or the environment plays into it. Does that is it harder to play in a big city where there's more distractions, or what are sort of the issues involved in that?
No, it had absolutely nothing to do with the city. It had everything to do with where I was in my dealing with my childhood trauma, which turned into, mental health issues and addiction issues. And so, like I said, it was really sort of a difficult time, because how addiction is treated is basically, they send you away for 30 days. They take away all of your coping mechanisms, and then they fill you a belly full of 12-step, and then they send you out the door. And that's why only 1 out of 30 people who go to a 30-day treatment facility go on to continuous sobriety.
All right. Okay. Well, it sounds, I think we might as well just segue and turn the conversation from that at that point. It's something that you're passionate about speaking about. So what, and gets involved in a lot of the work that you do these days. So what are, how do you sort of deal with this? Oftentimes, depending upon the wealth of a person, addiction centers are costly to begin with. How do you even begin to deal with a situation like that?
Yeah. Well, I'm not saying that, I went to 4 treatment centers in my life, and, obviously I picked up tools in each and every one of those treatment facilities, which eventually helped me to, now have over 5,000 consecutive days of sobriety, and I think that, what people don't understand is, like, I hate the word addiction because it has so much shame attached to it, a lot of people just say, well, why don't you just stop drinking? Well, I wish it was that easy to do. There's so many different factors that are involved, and I experienced a lot of trauma in my childhood and in my adolescence, which left me in, emotional pain and suffering. And what I call emotional pain and suffering is mental health, right? So you're left with this emotional pain and suffering. So how are you going to deal with it? Well, we tend to gravitate towards the dark side of life, and we get involved in addictions because the addiction helps us manage the emotional pain and suffering that's left behind from our traumatic childhood experiences, and it's a process of a lifetime. I always say I'm in therapy for the rest of my life, and I'm okay with that. But what, big pharma has taught us is that, there's this magic pill that we can take where all of these, symptoms are going to go away, right? But, what they're doing is they're giving us synthetic brain chemistry without knowing, what kind of chemicals we're lacking in our brain. And so, that whole thing is a trial and error process as well. So, and, the most effective thing that I've found is just the basic stuff. Sleep 7 to 9 hours a night, eat well, exercise, meditate, do yoga, these kind of things. And, eventually, your mental health stabilizes, and, you can go on to have a happy, healthy, peaceful, productive life. And it's, at the end of the day, it's not rocket science. It's just basic, stuff that, may be considered, fluffy, but, at the end of the day, it works.
Well, look, let's talk about that then. It's certainly the dark stuff that came out, but for a lot of people that are listening to this, they've never heard the Theoren Fleury story, and this was, obviously this was breaking news in Alberta nationally when it came out, but. For people that are unfamiliar with this, there was this guy named Graham James who was your coach when you were younger, and became known in the media some years ago after another player by the name of Sheldon Kennedy outed him for sexual abuse. And I don't remember the full timeline, but I believe that you came out public with the same accusations quite soon after Sheldon had revealed them. And for a lot of people listening, this is going to be the first time that they've heard this.
Mm-hmm.
So
it was 20 years. It was almost 20 years after the fact that Sheldon came out with his revelations. So
now, were you guys both playing with? I think you were both on the Flames during the 94-95 season. Like, had you guys discussed your encounters with him, or were comfortable? Did either of you know that this was going on before he came out publicly with this?
Yeah, I think we both knew that we had experienced, similar things, and, but, as of 2019, I have not seen a guide or a book that, tells us how we're supposed to deal with this. And, I just wasn't ready to deal with, with that part of it. He was, and, has done an amazing job, creating awareness and, implementing systems, that are effective for, kids organizations and all that. And so, but yeah, it was a difficult time in my life because, I thought I'd buried it and I would never have to deal with it again. And, obviously when he came out with his story, it brought back a whole lot of, memories and things that, like I said, I wasn't ready to deal with at the time. And that's when my addiction kicked into high gear, was, shortly after that.
One of the, as I said to you, I think before we started recording this, I spent the last few hours before chatting just looking at some of the other interviews that I've done. And there was one that you did with CBC, and I was astounded to hear this. And you said it occurred 150 times between the ages of 14 to 16. And what I'm trying to figure out is that for kids that aren't involved, for parents or kids that aren't involved in sports, they don't understand, I guess, the access that coaches and adults have to kids. Can you take us through the sort of the minor and junior hockey environment where someone would have access to you, or where you lift alone on road trips? I mean, it just sounds harrowing in the amount of access that he had to kids.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, what we're seeing, is, after Sheldon's story came out, then the Catholic Church came out, then Penn State came out, then Hollywood came out, so, a quarter of the people that walk around on this planet have had the same experiences I have had, yeah. Right?
Okay.
So 1 in 3 girls, 1 in 5 boys. So, we can't just single out hockey as being, the number one culprit of
sure.
pedophilia. this is a worldwide epidemic, where child trafficking is $1 billion industry. $1 billion industry. Child trafficking is $1 billion industry. So, so you can see the magnitude of, how many children get or have the same experience, that Sheldon and I have had. And that's why, both of us have chosen, to live the rest of our lives to advocate for kids who don't have voices.
It's one of the things that's quite confusing to me when I watch the media, because when they report it on the news, the term that they use all the time is sexually abused, and it's I just find it as sort of a nondescript blanket term when what we're really talking about is rape, and I'm a little bit confused oftentimes of why they're not a little bit more honest about this in the media.
Well, some smart-ass lawyer who had a pedophile as a client, came up with the phrase sexual abuse because it's not as, substantial as rape, and, got his client off. And so all the other smart lawyers saw this case and started using the word, sexual abuse as opposed to, what it really is, and that's rape, Well, to me, it's murder is what it is. If you want to really go to the next level, because it's a murder of the soul and the spirit and, all these, these phrases, which I'm using because it's the truth. And then, we spend the rest of our lives, trying to make sense of it to get to a place of, self-forgiveness and self-loathing and addictions and, and all that stuff so we can, assemble some sort of, life where we can function, on, life on life's terms.
Yeah. Do you think, and I kind of question myself whether I wanted to ask this question because it sounds uneducated, but I'm hoping that you'll understand what I mean by it. And do you think that the acceptance of homosexuality in recent years can curb this predatory behavior only because perhaps in theory by homosexuals being forced to be in the closet ended up in these sorts of organizations where they could behave in a predatory fashion, or is it a very sort of clear-cut difference between, no, these are pedophiles and it ends there?
Yeah. Well, I don't think we have enough research from a neuroscience perspective as to, why certain people are certain ways, right? And, there's no two people on the planet who have the exact same chemistry, right? And so unless we're sticking people in MRI machines and having, images of their brains being taken, we don't know as of yet why you become a pedophile, or why you prefer the same sex gender. You know what I mean? So but I believe that we are headed in the right direction when it comes to neuroscience and making sense of all of this. And what's interesting is, that, the Catholic Church, who's probably, and I think religion in general has done the most abuse to humanity over the years, why, these kinds of organizations, are still, at the center, of this, epidemic, and that, they don't have to face consequences and, all this stuff. And then they're making rulings about homosexuality and, and all this stuff is, to me, a bit ridiculous and a bit redundant, and so, I always refer to neuroscience, because for me, the neuroscience explanation of my behavior was when my life changed, because I now had an explanation, for my behavior, and that I could go and fix it, that I could rewire all my trauma in my brain, that I could, recover by taking a neuroscience perspective and approach to, my recovery.
Yeah, it's, as I read more about it, I was quite astounded by it, because I remember the other thing I remember is that you had to encounter him again. So I was going back and rereading around the launch of the Calgary Hitman as a Western Hockey League team. And it was, as you remember, it was really big news at the time, because Bret Hart was attached to it. They ended up using, his name and his logo. There were issues around the name of the Hitman and the branding around it. And then as I read through the pages, it said that Graham James was also attached to the project while you were part of it. I mean, how did you sort of deal with that? Because it seems to me that even after the abuse ended, you couldn't escape him, because he's sort of part of this hockey scene that's taking place, and he's constantly in your face no matter what.
Yeah. Well, the explanation is, Stockholm syndrome, is the best way I can explain how that, happened. And, it was a constant barrage of phone calls from him, after he got let go from Swift Current, is that, he wanted to continue to coach and stay in the game. And because all of us guys that he had coached who were in the NHL and making, insane amounts of money, he approached, as many of us as he could to support him in this, venture to bring this junior team to Calgary. And,
really?
Yep.
How do you deal with that? So you accepted it, or you were on board with it?
Well, if you Google Stockholm Syndrome, there is a great explanation as to why people who are abused, still feel some sort of loyalty towards their, abuser. It's like women who go back into, abusive relationships. It's the same, where you are attached to them, and it's difficult to make sense of why you still want to be in this person's life, or a part of their lives as well.
I understand that. So has that changed? How do you view the situation now?
How do I view it? I don't think about it. I don't need to think about it. It's not part of my psyche anymore, because I've worked really hard to rewire in my brain. So post-traumatic stress disorder, which I suffered from after what happened, is, I've spent a lot of time with some really skilled therapists, rewiring, those 2.5 years of my life. So when I hear the word Graham James or pedophilia or whatever it is, I do not have any reaction chemically to what happened.
Okay, you had mentioned earlier, the struggle with addiction and your how you don't enjoy that term, but for how much of your playing career were you under the influence of alcohol and drugs, and how long were you using?
From the time I was 15 until the time I was 36.
All right. Okay. And
basically, from the first time I had a sip of alcohol, I was hooked.
Right.
Instantly.
Okay.
Yeah. Because it was a way to manage the emotional pain that was left behind from those experiences.
Mm. When you talk about your sobriety, I know a few other people that that have become clean and sober. Some of them are still able to enjoy having a couple drinks without going overboard. Can you do that? Are you a teetotaler? No.
Yeah, I'm done. Yeah. I find other ways to get my dopamine and serotonin hits.
All right. Well, look, let's. I want to talk about some of the things with politics. I see some of the stuff that you post online, and there's quite a few things that I think will probably share a lot of those sort of similar opinions. When, as I mentioned in our periodical that we do in Canada, we'll be doing a story with the organization Alberta Fights Back, who I assume you might know that they've been doing some billboards there, and they're focused on the issue of Alberta and prairie secession. You know, you would know the landscape of Manitoba, Saskatchewan, and Alberta very well. Do you want to just sort of talk as someone who's over there, living there at the moment, the anger of the prairie provinces when it comes to, not getting any recognition or support federally?
Mm-hmm. Well, what we're seeing, not only in Canada but worldwide, is this idea of socialism. Okay, and anybody who knows anything about Western Canadians is that we are hard-working people who have a tremendous amount of pride in the work that we do, okay? And so what socialism is that, it's big government, right? That we need to rely absolutely solely on government taking care of us, right? And so that's where the anger comes from. We just want to work. We want to be able to produce our resources. We want to be able to work hard and through the fruits of our labor, support our families, right? And what's happened here is they have landlocked the resources and they've landlocked the jobs, And so people who are used to working hard every day are not working anymore. And so, that's where, the anger comes from, is that, people want to work, can't work because our government says that, they want to take care of us. They want big government and they want to, tax, the living crap out of us. And, all that money just keeps going to foreign entities. None of it is staying in Canada, and so, it's ridiculous, absolutely ridiculous.
Yeah, they were talking in the story that we do. They talk about how they won't build the pipeline, so Quebec won't bring in Alberta oil, so they're still importing it from the Saudis. So they're supporting a Saudi regime in order to do this, and at the same time, a lot of these green groups that are being funded are actually being funded by the Rockefellers, which is holding up American oil interests in Alberta. So Alberta's not being able to pull out of the ground and export it anywhere, and it's benefiting everyone except for Canadians.
Mm. Yeah. The Liberal Party of Canada believes that the Canadian people work for them, and that we need to be told how to live our lives. You know what I mean? Like, that's not government's responsibility. Government's responsibility is to, improve the quality of people's lives. And I would say for the majority, Canada has never been at a place that we're in right now, and scandal after scandal after scandal after scandal, it's absolutely ridiculous.
Do you think there's any reason why BC is sort of this outlier? So the prairie provinces, it's sort of Alberta's quite staunch, and that's what it's known for. But then, right next door to us, when we call us the West, we've got, arguably the hardest green province in the country.
Mm-hmm. Well, I would say follow the money. Always follow the money. The money will eventually get you, to the answer. And, Canada has never been more corrupt than it is right now, and we're seeing it day after day. It's just another scandal or another investigation or, whatever it is. And we are allowing outside entities, which means other countries, to, dictate what's happening in Canada. And of course, Canadians are, being more and more privy as to the timeline of, everything that's happening. And here we are, here we are, the worst time in Canadian history. And, the guy that's leading the country is not a leader.
No,
he's
definitely
not a leader. Never has been, never will be. He's got the name Trudeau. That's it. When you're sitting across or beside the leader from Japan and you say that he's from China.
That's right. That just happened.
How ridiculous is that? How ridiculous is that? That you can't even, for 5 minutes, remember who you're with. That's why I keep saying on social media, you cannot fix stupid. No matter how hard you try, you cannot fix it. You absolutely cannot fix it. And when are we going to have a minister of common sense in this country?
Well, look, the first part of this process has potentially started. Alberta just went through provincial elections very recently. Jason Kennedy has been out to Ottawa to meet with Trudeau, I think, to acknowledge that they're going to fight the issue of the pipelines in court. What do you think? What do you think he needs to do to get the province back on track?
Well, nothing's going to happen until the end of October, right? We're just going to see a whole bunch of mudslinging and more scandals. That's what's going to happen. And, if you sit on the right, you're a racist, you're a misogynist, you're, it's honestly, God, it's absolutely ridiculous what is happening here.
Look, it's no different than what we encountered down here. It's as I said, I understand why people voted for Trump. It makes perfect sense to me, and we're encountering the same thing down here in Australia. If you're in for cultural assimilation and making sure that sort of immigration follows that stand, and you explain that immigration is fine, but we need to make sure that we can afford to pay for these if they need to come in and be on welfare programs. Australia has a very similar economy to Canada where it's resource-based, and when you've got all the environmentalists saying, you're not allowed to pull anything out of the ground for your nation's prosperity, and then you've got, huge amount of government intervention and red tape on creating businesses, boosting minimum wages that prevent small businesses from even being able to start up. We're encountering a lot of the same issues down here, even though I still, consider myself a born and bred Canadian.
Yeah, well, that's socialism. That's right out of the left's playbook. All of this is right out of the left's playbook, right? And it's been proven over and over through decades and decades that socialism, at the end of the day, does not work. Does not work.
Well, where do you think that? I don't disagree with you, but one of the things that I guess having left the country is everyone talks. They go, well, Canada's a socialist country. I mean, look at the healthcare system that you've got. Is there sort of an element that you can, Canada is considered at least a socialist democracy, almost the way that Sweden is to a lot of regards, and in the same way that the outsiders that I talk to, as I say, over here, there's nobody that I meet who's not sort of from key provinces that thinks Trudeau's bad. They absolutely love this guy who takes selfies and wears pink socks and and uses catch-all terms like inclusiveness. They don't really look beyond the facade of it.
He's the village idiot, is what he is. He's the village idiot, and I think the more days that go by and the more we get to October, I think, that image is completely, going to the wayside, and we're seeing him for, the stupidity, which is, their party. And even their party is starting to rebel against.
That's right. Yeah. And he's kicking them out of cabinet. He's kicking them out for even saying anything now. Yeah.
Yeah. Exactly. So, I believe that anything that improves the quality of lives of, the people of this country, I'm all for it. Which means we need a selfless leader who lives his life with compassion and vulnerability and empathy and all these things. But this goes back to what we talked to earlier, is we have never seen in the history of leadership in the world where we have the most traumatized leaders who experience the same thing that I experienced as a kid. We're seeing these guys become leaders, psychopaths, sociopaths, that are leading countries. Because when we're traumatized, we tend to need power in order to, which is an addiction in itself, is, because we experience what we experience, it's all about ego. We need our egos fed, and there's no bigger of an ego that's being fed is Trudeau's ego, right? And you can't lead with ego, okay? Because what happens is eventually people resent you and they start to dislike you and all of that. And that's exactly what we're seeing in Canada is, this guy who's led for 4 years with his ego, his selfies, and, he's a self-proclaimed feminist and, all this BS, we're finally seeing through it, which is creating resentment, right? But people who lead with compassion and empathy and vulnerability and all those things, people will follow you to the ends of the earth if that's your leadership style, right? And don't ask anybody to do something that you're not willing to do on your own. If you ask Trudeau to live in poverty for a year, do you honestly think that he would do that?
Well, I think he would, but you have to understand his version of poverty is probably 150 grand a year living somewhere. So he lives a different life to us. He's the son of a former prime minister who sits on government funds already before he was even born to come into this, and then he was. It's no different almost to like the American Democrats, for because he was the son of a Trudeau. It's almost like a Clinton. So it's like, oh, we need another one of those to run the country.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and what did the Americans say? Not a chance. We're having another Clinton in. You know what I mean? So, and it's and what's really interesting is some of the richest people on the planet are politicians. Yes. How does that happen?
Well, this is one of the arguments.
How does that happen?
Well, this is one of the things that I've been reading online when they talk about American politics is they keep banging on about telling Trump to release his tax returns. He goes, maybe I will, maybe I won't. But then they go, oh, well, what about Hillary Clinton and Nancy Pelosi and Elizabeth Warren? These people have only their entire life lived in the public service, and apparently they're worth millions and millions and millions of dollars. How do you end up at that point being, if you haven't worked in the private economy and you work as a bureaucrat, how the hell do you have that much money saved up?
Exactly, because what is an average congressman's salary? $250?
Maybe, yeah.
Okay, so do the math. $250,000 for 30 years. What's that? That's $6 million, not $200 million.
Yeah, exactly.
That's $6 million, right? So either there's a whole bunch of insider trading going on where they fucking buy these, penny stocks that turn into billions of dollars, right? Because they can influence.
There's construction engineering contracts as well that pass by, and those handshakes that go through for it. Yeah, it's skimming of everything.
It's hilarious.
So,
and then the rest of the world,
Yes.
It's just I don't know. I sit here every day and just shake my head, And
Well,
now the left, you know, has all the media support. So the message that's being portrayed out there is like, it's one way, you know.
but this is the whole thing.
So
It's
what is the
ridiculous.
truth? What is the truth? What is the truth?
Well, again, as you said,
You
you
know?
follow the money. Once you start looking at the numbers, and this is, I think, one of the issues that you find is that they only worry about the feel good stuff, and they don't understand the impact of any of it, and they refuse to. I think is the biggest problem, because they're sort of wrapped up in this idea that capitalism is evil. So if you want to talk about money and how that affects, you're already part of the problem. I think we're dealing with sort of an entirely new ideological environment here that's taken hold over the last couple decades.
Yeah, it's you know, it's a sad state of affairs, you know, where you know, I'm a firm believer in the universe, and the universe has absolutely everything we need for every single human being that lives on this planet. You know what I mean? But because you have trauma, which is the biggest epidemic on the planet, right? We've all experienced trauma in our lives. And those of us who don't deal with the trauma, right? Because hurt people, right? And
well, take us through the work that you're...
That's exactly what we're seeing. It's hurt people hurting people every single day, right? And instead of taking it from, you know, a spiritual perspective where, you know, I have everything that I need. I don't need $50 million like I did in my NHL career, because $50 million made me corrupt and fucking ego driven and all this bullshit. Right. And now that I don't have this money, I'm 50 times or 100 times happier than when I did. And now that I'm in the field of helping people, you know, I have this amazing life.
Let's talk about that then, because you know you've been talking about, you know, research, mental health, science, and medicine. All of this, does this fit underneath Fleury Enterprises now? Is that all the work that you do in terms of your speaking and community work these days?
Yeah, you know, we're trying to get people to think differently. That that we're in the majority. Whether you have a trauma experience, a mental health disorder, or an addiction, you're in the majority. You're not in the minority, right? That's what my research has told me. Okay. So, but, you know, I can only help people that want help, right? And the majority of people don't want help. Okay.
Well, that's always the way. You can't help someone unless they choose to help themselves.
Exactly. Until they hit that proverbial rock bottom, so to speak. Right. And so what we try to do is to formulate a message that, you know, it's okay to ask for help. It's okay to go on a healing journey, you know, all of these things. And, you know, we try to lead by example, right? Because if you read my story, you know, I'm in the minority of people who actually, you know, have gone on to, you know, make their lives better, right? And so, you know, that's what we're trying to tell people, that, hey, you're in this spot right now, but you don't have to stay there. You don't have to sit in it. You can find ways to heal and move forward in your life, right? But, you know, and I call myself an expert in relational trauma. Well, my trauma happened in relationship with my parents, in relationship with my abusers, you know, some of the coaches that I had, some of the people that I, you know, around caused trauma in my life. And so how am I going to heal from that? Well, I'm going to heal in relationship. That's how I'm going to heal, right? And so the first relationship I have to have is with myself first, right? Need to love myself, need to take care of myself instead of, always being in conflict or running away, from situations or being involved in addictions or whatever it is, right? I need to get to a place where I don't need, chaos and, drama and all that in my life. I have to get to a place where I don't need that anymore. And how do I do that? Well, I need to be in relationship with people who are also, on the same journey and on the same path. That's how I'm going to heal. And so, we have the highest awareness in the history of our planet that trauma, mental health, and addiction is the biggest epidemic on the planet. Okay. People are talking about it, da, 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 da. But on the other side of the coin, we have the highest suicide rates on the planet. So all this awareness, why isn't it being turned into action and getting people well? That's the $1 million question that needs to be answered.
And so what's your theory on that?
Community. You get a bunch of people in a room, you use vulnerability to create safety. And then once you have safety in the room, it's absolutely incredible what happens is because people start to pop up and start, using their voice for the very first time in their life, and they put a voice to that pain and suffering. And then, and nobody runs out of the room and nobody points the finger at them or judges them or anything, right? We just listen and hold the space long enough for that person to, for the first time in their life, tell their truth.
So, Theo, if there's a kid who's listening to this right now who lives in some remote area in PEI, how do you deliver these programs? How do you sort of reach out to the amount of remote areas that Canada has?
Well, it's on a first come, first served basis, right? I'm only one person and I can only do, so much, right? But what I try to do is, when I'm in PEI and I have 300 people in the room, is I say, you need to create a community safe space where we can have these conversations, where, people can stand up in front of, their peers and say, hey, I was raped 150 times from the time I was 14 to 16. And, people just hold the space, and listen. You don't need to give advice. You don't need to, all you need to do is listen.
And how do you guys do this? So, when you say, do you guys travel to deliver these programs? How is the business run and how do you reach people?
So basically, we belong to all the speakers bureaus in Canada, and we have a website. We have a very healthy social media following. And so it either comes in through the speakers bureaus, the website, or social media. And what we've done over 10 years is we've built a reputation where, when we're invited to these communities, that after we leave, change, starts to happen. And what I do is, I tell my story in a very vulnerable way, which gets people to self-reflect, on their own experience. And because of my research over the 10 years, that the majority of my audience is in some sort of pain and suffering, because that's all I see in my travels is pain and suffering, emotional pain and suffering. And nobody's ever explained to them emotional pain the way that we explain emotional pain and suffering. And so people then are like, wow, okay, maybe I can get rid of this. Maybe I can deal with it. Maybe I can find a safe space or a safe person to, move forward so that I don't have to, live in anxiety and depression and, I have OCD or I have PTSD or, whatever it is. There's, what I've found in the healing process is there's no such word as impossible.
And
that it's only possible.
And what becomes the next step in the process then? So, they come out and meet you, sort of identify that they have these issues. What's the next step in the program, or how do they begin to work through these issues?
Well, we usually are brought in by some sort of organization who helps in the field that I'm talking about, right? So, but at the end of the day, like we said earlier, you can't help somebody that doesn't want help, right? And so you need to make the choice and you need to make the decision that I'm sick and tired of being sick and tired and that I'm going to make a change, right? And then when you make the change, you say, oh, right, Theo spoke at this mental health organization. Man, I'm going to give them a call and I'm going to start my journey and my path. Like you can lead a horse to water, but you can't make it drink.
That's very, very true.
Right?
So do you experience that? It sounds like you sort of encounter this occasionally where you know that you've sort of got someone, but they're not really opening up to the issue.
Mm-hmm. All day, every day. I see it every day, right? But if you continue to plant the seed or you drop the rock in the water, you don't know what the ripple effect you have. But because we've been doing this for 10 years, we get lots of great feedback, right? Because they'll email us, hey, I was at your speaking event. You spoke directly to me. And you know what I did? I took the suggestions that you suggested in your speech, and I'm on a journey and I'm on a path of healing, right? And what you hope happens is once that person starts to feel better, is that they now go and help somebody else, on their healing journey.
Yeah. So when you talk about, you haven't seen any of these, more help sort of been received now that you talk about these issues of, mental illness and the fact that it needs research. What in an ideal scenario, what would you like to see happen to sort of address these issues?
Well, the mental health system in Canada is completely run over, like the waiting lists and all of that. And so, we need to see, more support from government, right? Like how many political campaigns do you know that actually talks about mental health as being an epidemic? Exactly. and so because they dole out money to, different organizations, they just bypass mental health. They're like, it's not that important, and right? So we run a foundation here in Calgary called the Breaking Free Foundation, okay? And we support all trauma survivors. So we have like Vietnam vets and people that were in the South African War and, people who were bullied in school and, kids or people who parents divorced when they were really young or grew up in violence or whatever it is. So we support all those people. And so we run two programs. First program is a therapy grant program where you can write to us for a therapy grant. And once you're approved, which we approve pretty much everybody, we then hook you up with a trauma-informed therapist. And we pay for 6 sessions with this therapist. Then if you need more after that, you can reapply and we'll pay for more. Okay, so that's the first program. Because most people can't afford through their insurance companies more than, 3 sessions, right? Which isn't even enough to even, start the process of understanding the layers of trauma, right? So then we run another program called the Meetup, okay? And we do them twice a month here in Calgary, where anybody and everybody who wants to come and talk about trauma, mental health, and addiction. And we have 8 board members. And so we co-facilitate a conversation around trauma, mental health, and addiction. And it goes in many different ways and directions. We've actually saved 5 people from killing themselves in this program. And what's happened is those 5 people who've had these sort of spiritual awakenings are now helping other people on their healing journey and their healing process. So when I say community, I believe that creating these communities is the answer to solving, the epidemic.
Interesting. Do you think, when you talk about socialism, though, one of the arguments is that it's such a costly endeavor and it needs to be funded by government. Is that sort of an anomaly of what you think of where funding should be, or issues of how the government funds this?
Well, do you know how much our meetups cost us to put on?
Well, no, I have no idea.
0.
Right.
Because the venue's donated to us, and it's just our time.
Right.
That's it.
Okay.
And we're having enormous success in helping people deal with trauma, mental health, and addiction. So, but the way that we're programmed is, we got to spend money in order for it to have success. Well, no, you don't.
It's a different way about thinking about things. You're right, but you talk about community issues. It's it's not something that we have anymore, though. That's the other thing that people aren't used to spending time with their neighbors and friends. It's not something that we're conditioned to do anymore.
Because we got to get rid of cell phones.
Yeah.
Because they've taught us to be disconnected. That's what they've done.
You're not wrong. I sat on an education board, and they talked about the issues with kids these days and how they lack resiliency and all these other issues because they're too glued to their phones and they're scared about missing out and what people are saying about them, and they've completely lost all of their social skills these days because they can hide behind it to communicate with one another as opposed to walking up face to face.
Yeah, but from a neuroscience perspective, what do you think cell phones provide people with from a chemically?
I assume companionship and probably also some form of dopamine by receiving sort of messages, the way that it's almost like a new text message comes in, the way that a gambler gets a quick win.
Mm-hmm. So when I was writing my second book called Conversations with a Rattlesnake, we discovered the 4 things that trauma teaches us that become the core values of what we believe we are. Okay. So the first thing that trauma teaches us is abandonment and neglect. That no matter what relationship we're in, that person's going to leave us, whether it's parents, grandmothers, grandfathers, best friends, spouses, girlfriends, whatever it is. Okay. Second thing, I'm not good enough. I'm not good enough. Third thing, I'm not lovable. Okay. Fourth thing, which is our Oxycontin and fentanyl users and our people that kill themselves. Do I even exist in the world? Okay. So the majority of people who experience trauma, that's how they feel about themselves. Okay. But it was the greatest light bulb moment for me because the lady that I was writing the book with, who's a neuroscientist, told me that she could rewire all 4 of these things in my brain. And we accomplished that because I do feel good enough. I am in a great relationship. I have great relationships with my kids, my parents, and so, that is good enough. Yes, I definitely feel like I'm good enough. Do I feel lovable? Yes, I'm totally lovable. And do I exist? Yeah, I exist because I'm taking up space in the world and I'm making the world a better place. Right? So, so that's what we need to deal with, is you got a whole bunch of people walking around. And so every time they post a picture on Facebook, they're checking every 5 minutes to see how many likes, because every time we look at our phone, it's a hit of dopamine. It's a hit of serotonin. It feeds that.
We're looking for validation.
Center. Yeah. It feeds that pleasure center in our brain. Right. So, yeah.
Well, look, that's probably a good place to finish off our conversation. I mean, I hadn't realized the extent of the work that you do in these days, but it's good that you've been able to turn it into something positive. As I said, I'm living overseas now, so I read about this online, but I don't see the media and how present you are in it these days. So before,
because they don't want to hear my perspective. They want to hear the big pharma perspective. They don't like guys that are healing.
Well, what is the phrase? There's no money in the cure. There's money in the treatment.
Yes, yep, exactly. And when you tell them that you have this program that costs nothing, they don't want to hear that.
So for people that want to find out more, where can they go?
So they go to theofleury.life, which is my website, and I am on LinkedIn, Facebook, Instagram, and Twitter. My handle is Theo Fleury 14.
Awesome. Well, look, thanks for your time today, and who knows, maybe we'll be able to do it again at some time down the track.
All right. I appreciate you staying up.